always from the heart of the city, and now on demand 24/7 on the CHFI website. This is the soundtrack to accompany a ring of great power and a little people with courage to spare. And I'm Don Jackson, around the world on the internet. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote, "In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit." It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. A few of the opening lines of a novel that was published on September 21st, 1937. A novel that would set the stage for a trilogy that would eventually be made into 3 of the most popular movies of all time. This hour, let's revisit the Shire with Hobbits and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. The Beatles, On That Long and Winding Road, and Enya, and Only Time. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. As it said in Merriam-Webster's Encyclopedia of Literature, and I quote, "The novel introduced Tolkien's richly imagined world of Middle-earth and served as a prologue to his trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. A race of small, human-like creatures, hobbits characteristically value peace, simplicity, and cozy homes. Yet they are capable of incredible feats of courage and resourcefulness. The unwilling hero of The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, is persuaded to join Thorin and his 12 dwarves to recover their stolen treasure, which is being guarded by the dragon Smaug. During the expedition, Bilbo finds a magical ring that renders the wearer invisible, which figures prominently in The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is the story of Bilbo's maturing from a seeker of warmth and comforts to a fighter, however humble, for the greater good." Unquote. So it's off to the Shire we go this hour with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Vanessa Williams with The Colors of the Wind. And Celine Dion with Corey Hart's Prayer. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. For just a moment, I want you to imagine that it is the month of April in Middle-earth. Bilbo Baggins, minding his own business, is relaxing by the door to his very comfortable hobbit hole. An unexpected visitor arrives. An old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, a silver scarf, over which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. Unquote. Of course, it is the wizard Gandalf. His arrival seems to foreshadow another knock at the door in the trilogy to come. Whenever this wizard arrives, adventure is sure to follow. He leaves a mark on the outside of the door, and eventually 13 dwarves arrive. Bilbo is beside himself as he tries to play the good host to these fabled inhabitants from beneath the mountains. Most of them have brought musical instruments, including the one they call Thorin. The lyrics to a song of old, shortly, with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. The Beatles again, and I'll Follow the Sun. Miley, Cyrus with The Climb, and Colin James, Into the Mystic. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. The music is about to begin, in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. And I quote, "It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. For over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. The ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought, and light they caught to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung the flowering stars, on crowns they hung the dragon fire in twisted wire. They meshed the light of moon and sun. For over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold. Where no man delves, there they lay long, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread. The trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon. The dwarves, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall beneath his feet, beneath the moon. For over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the Hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands, and by cunning and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees, He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End, Underhill, again. Hobbits and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Cat Stevens with Moonshadow and John Denver with Annie Song. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. It is a classic that set the stage for many other authors. Tolkien defined the genre by mapping out a world that could only exist in the imagination. It opened the doors to so many other fantasy worlds. But there was something special about Tolkien's world. It wasn't just an epic adventure featuring mythical creatures and strange landscapes. It was a tale that was filled with lessons that were not lost on the reader. I don't know if he consciously thought about it, but the dangers of addiction were explored. The ring that Bilbo finds is very seductive indeed. He becomes obsessed by wearing it. It renders the wearer invisible, and we begin to see the dangers inherent with his growing dependency on it. In essence, he becomes like the creature who originally found the ring and lost it. The creature, Gollum. Gollum acts like a drug addict who frantically searches for his precious after Bilbo finds it. Instead of picking up on Gollum's irrational state of mind, Bilbo follows the same path to dependency. It is a burden that his nephew Frodo will also have to bear, and none too well, in the trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. One of the lessons of Lord of the Rings was first hinted at in The Hobbit. The power of a fellowship or teamwork. The power of good over evil. Even when it seems the odds are against you, good will most often triumph in the end. One of the most important lessons the book teaches is this. You may be diminutive in stature, but in the end, it's the size of your heart that counts. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, published on September the 21st, 1937, 72 years ago. And we're hoping that a movie version worthy of the Lord of the Rings trilogy will soon follow. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Neil Young, Searching for a Heart of Gold, and Chris Isaak, and A Wicked Game. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. The Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit are two adventures filled with all manner of courageous people willing to stand up to creatures that would make most of us cower. And yet each and every one of them finds the individual resolve to stand up for their freedom against overwhelming odds. You must remember the trilogy was written during the time of the Great World Wars. September 21st, 1937, The Hobbit was published. And we end the journey where we began, back home. Tolkien writes, "As all things come to an end, even this story. A day came at last when they were in sight of the country where Bilbo had been born and bred, where the shapes of the land and of the trees were as well known to him as his hand and toes. Coming to a rise, he could see his own hill in the distance, and he stopped suddenly and said, 'Roads go ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow by winter sown, and through merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feel that wandering, have gone, turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known.'" Unquote. Even Tolkien knew, in essence, there's no place like home. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. I hope you will tell all your friends about Lovers and Other Strangers. Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.